Every single time the Bitcoin price is going up, I inevitably get this question: when should I sell my Bitcoin? I want to take a minute and try to explain why that mindset is the wrong one to have regarding Bitcoin. First, Bitcoin is not a stock. It's not an app. It's not profitable software. It's a better money.
And I think that is probably one of the hardest concepts to grasp in this current environment, especially because the dominant narrative right now in the Bitcoin space is that Bitcoin is a store of value. But there are many places in the world where you can actually use Bitcoin as money, like El Salvador, for example. When you go to a place where you can actually use it as money, everything about Bitcoin really starts to click on a very, very different level.
Now, when most people hear that, they have no idea what it means, and that's perfectly understandable. But for a second, let's talk about traditional investments so that we can have a way to compare. So how do we judge whether a stock or a business or an asset is a good or bad investment? Well, we look at its profits. We look at its earnings. We look at the change in its price over time in money. But this presents a really interesting problem. What if the amount of money in circulation isn't stable? If trillions of new units of the money are being poured into the economy, well, then everything's going to go up in price because it all just has to adjust in a relative sense to the amount of money that exists.
And this is another important point to understand about Bitcoin. Unlike fiat money, Bitcoin, the rules of Bitcoin never change. So you have literally hundreds of thousands of nodes around the world that are keeping track of the blockchain, that are keeping track of all of the transactions, and all of them have the same rules, okay? That's a decentralized network. Whereas with fiat currencies like the US dollar, you have one single entity that has control of not only the supply, but also the rules of increasing that supply. And they're only ever increasing it. They're never decreasing it. So that's another really important point to kind of drill in on.
What if there are trillions of new units of the money being created, and they are all being filtered through a single set of industries, like the banking and financial and political sectors? Well, then the price of all of those things would increase far faster than everything else in the economy. So it would appear as if all of these things are becoming more valuable, when it's actually not true. If this was happening, how would you tell? Let's take the example of two different things that people generally think of as always growing: real estate and the stock market, which will use the median house value and the S&P 500. If you just flat chart their prices, it just looks like it's skyrocketing. But what we want to do is compare it to the amount of money that exists. So let's take the M2 measurement. This is about the closest thing we have to measuring the amount of money in circulation. Let's put it on a logarithmic chart so that we can actually see what's happening. Now let's even out the scale and start them from the same place so that we can see the relative growth.
They're the same picture.
And consider the vast industry of bankers, rent seekers, financial instruments, mortgage-backed securities, derivatives, hedge funds, that we literally give all of our retirements to BlackRock, who then give it to a bunch of giant corporations. And yet none of this is actually making us wealthier. It's just forcing us to pay them to do what our money should do anyway.
And this is another part of when you start to own and use Bitcoin as money, and you start to experience the amazing feeling of, I can just make payments. I can just have it as a store of value. And it's protecting me. Not only is it protecting me against inflation, it's actually helping me get way ahead on inflation. When you look at what everything costs in fiat terms and dollar terms, and then you look at what everything costs in Bitcoin terms, in fiat terms, the price of everything is going up. In Bitcoin terms, the price of everything is going down. So that's why when I'm coaching clients and talking, getting people into Bitcoin, especially if they've not been great with money in the past and they're learning all of these concepts, what we're talking about is them, once they start peeling off some of their savings to put into Bitcoin, is that they don't want to look at it or touch it for 4 to 5 years. Because if you go back and you look at the history of Bitcoin over those 4 to 5 year cycles, it just absorbs all of that inflation. And so we become the beneficiaries of the money printer in a very different way.
Which is hold its value. So many of the things that we think are getting more valuable are actually just reflecting the fact that your money is less valuable. Is 21 million forever. How many dollars can we expect there to be in the future? Well, in 1975, the U.S. national debt was about $500 billion. A decade later, it was about 3 times that number. A decade after that, it was about double what it was in 1985. Another 10 years in 2005, and it was double what it was in 1995. 2015, a little over twice what it was in 2005. And today, it's right around twice what it was in 2015. Give it another year. Anyone with a few warm brain cells left can tell you pretty confidently that in 2035, the U.S. debt's going to be probably between 70 and 80 trillion, and in 2045, it'll be between 140 and 200 trillion. The dollar will always lose value because there will never be a time that they don't print more of it. But
there is a time they can't stop printing more of it. The more you go down this rabbit hole and the more you understand what fiat currency is, what the dollar actually is, everything in our system is based on debt. And it's just crazy. And that's when you start to truly, truly understand this problem, this pernicious and pervasive problem of inflation. But the good news is that there is a way out of it, but you have to really put your brain to the grindstone to really truly understand Bitcoin. So that's what we're trying to do on this channel, is help you guys understand, first of all, the problem, which is inflation, and how pernicious it is and how pervasive in all of our lives it is, but that there is also a way out of that.
Bitcoin will always grow in value because it will always be 21 million and society will get more valuable. The more we work, the more we innovate, the easier things get. They should be more affordable. So when people ask, when should I sell Bitcoin? When should I take my profits? My response is, when should you get rid of something that consistently grows in value in order to hold on to something that consistently loses value? I mean,
and this is a huge difference. You may still, if you're new to Bitcoin, you're just getting into Bitcoin and you're still looking at it as this stock investment or this traditional type of investment, you may be thinking along those terms like, when should I sell this? When should I sell this? And the argument that he's making that I totally agree with is that why would you sell something that is going to continue to grow in value exponentially over the next decades for something that they can print out of thin air? Once you get to that place where you can't unsee it, you probably will never want to sell your Bitcoin unless you absolutely have to.
Ever looked at the price of dollars when measured in Venezuelan bolivars? You've made billions of Venezuelan bolivars. When are you going to sell your dollars to have more Venezuelan fiat? Now, if you want to use Bitcoin to make your life better or to accomplish something that matters to you, by all means, that's exactly what money is for. But you should never sell a money that can't be printed by anyone in order to hold a money that is printed by the trillions every single year. Bitcoin is better money. You should never sell it for dollars for the exact same reason that you would never get rid of your diamonds because they were worth more measured in dollars. Just save in better money. It really is that simple. But that's just my 2 cents.
I totally agree with that. I think Guy Swann is definitely a very, very clear voice in the space. He has a podcast called Bitcoin Audible. He reads a lot of, literature that's put out in the Bitcoin space. And I just always enjoy listening to him. So yeah, when should you sell your Bitcoin? Probably never. The audience I know that I'm talking to is somewhere along that continuation of, trying to get out of debt, trying to get their money right and all of those things. So there may be times that you need to sell a little bit of Bitcoin to get some fiat to live on, because let's face it, we don't live on a Bitcoin standard yet. We still live on a fiat standard. So that's all I had for you today. Hope you enjoyed. Give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share it with somebody you know. That helps get the message out. And thanks so much for watching.